Un petit coucou à tous, good morning.
Hi, everybody. A very good morning to you all, and thank you all so much for joining us today for the launch of our 6th Lucha report on lung cancer, which relates to the experiences and quality of life of people impacted by lung cancer in Europe. So I'm just going to kick off by going through our agenda for today's launch. Alfonso, if I could have the next slide, please. So today's agenda, I'm going to give a very short welcome address to kick us off, and then we are delighted to have MEP Sokol with us, who's going to give an EU perspective on lung cancer. I'm then going to follow this up by giving a short overview of the data generated by our 6th report, and this is going to be followed by a talk from Lavinia McGee, who's going to give more of a clinical perspective on quality of life. Then we have 2 short videos of 2 people sharing their personal experiences of lung cancer, which is Sally and Georges. We're then going to have some time, we hope, for some Q&A. So if you're on Zoom, you can type your question into the chat box. If you're on other social media channels, you can type your question into the comment box, and we'll do our very best to get to as many of these as possible. And then we're going to close off our meeting with just an overall summary of our report for this year, and then our call to action as well. Next slide, please, Alfonso. So today, it's a very momentous occasion. It has been a long year, and we are absolutely delighted to have the launch of our 6th report. As always, we are usually at this time at the EU Parliament in Brussels, but we're all very aware now of the impact of COVID-19, and we have gotten a lot more used now to having everything pretty much on a virtual platform. But we will keep our fingers and toes crossed that we can all meet again in person in Brussels for the launch of our report next November. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are maybe new to Lung Cancer Europe or who may not know a huge amount about us, our purpose and vision are very simple. Our purpose is to be the voice of people impacted by lung cancer in Europe, to advocate and network to improve outcomes for our community. And our vision is to be an equal stakeholder in the community so that nobody dies from lung cancer anymore. Next slide, please, Alfonso. And of course, Lucha take part in a wide range of activities, both external projects and our own projects as well. But everything Lucha does revolves around 3 pillars, which is around education, awareness, and advocacy. And from those 3 key pillars, we have a number of key objectives, which is around the destigmatization of lung cancer, access to early diagnosis, equity of access to treatments and care across the pathway. And then in terms of our member organisations, we work on capacity building and networking as well within the community. And we hope our values are those values that you experience while working with us. And that's around representativeness, commitment, reliability, uniqueness, and trust. Next slide, please, Alfonso. So at the moment, the Lucha network is continuing to grow. We have 21 European countries represented. So this is the WHO European region. We have 19 full members and 14 associate and individual members. And this is just a simplified map showing where both full and associate and individual members are. So if you're out there and you're wondering about the work of Lucha or you would like to join, please do get in touch with us, as we would love to have you as we try to expand our network and be more representative of European countries. Next slide, please, Alfonso. So as I said, this is our 6th report this year. Our previous reports have centered around challenges in lung cancer in Europe, disparities in diagnostics care and access to treatment. We've also looked at challenges in lung cancer clinical trials and also the challenges that people face around early diagnosis and screening in lung cancer. And last year, we also had quite a large, extensive report which looked at the psychological and social impact of this disease. And this year's report is really a follow-on from that, looking at different aspects that people are experiencing while impacted by lung cancer here in Europe. So as I said, later on, I will try my best to go through as much as I can from the report. So with that, I'll ask Alfonso to go on to the next slide. And it really is my very great pleasure to introduce MEP Sokol. Thank you so much for being with us today. MEP Sokol is from Croatia. He's a member of EPP and he has been working in the European Parliament since 2019. And he's now going to give us an EU perspective on lung cancer. Welcome, MEP Sokol, and thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. I hope that you can hear me and see me. I'm very honored to be hosting this event because this is very topic which is directly linked to what I'm doing in the European Parliament, especially through the Special Committee on Beating Cancer. And I think that lung cancer here is one of the most important types of cancers because it is the #1 killer of all cancers. And I was shocked to learn recently that only 16% of patients live after 5 years after the diagnosis, which is a complete disaster and shows us that we on the European level can do a lot, but also on the national level to change these figures and to have much better results of both prevention and the early detection and treatment of lung cancer. What I would like to say when we speak of the EU role, of course, I always try to be as concrete as possible. So I do not like to speak in terms of we ought to do this or we ought to do that, because what is important is to focus on what we actually can do, where we have the concrete powers, concrete instruments, both regulatory and financial, to actually do something. And of course, when we speak of healthcare, healthcare is usually seen, and that is partly true, as a competence of the member states. As I said, this is true, but only partly. So member states are primarily responsible for organizing and financing and managing their healthcare systems. But European Union can provide an added value in those areas where member states cannot resolve some problems by themselves. And I think in the area of cancer, we have a lot of room where a common European action is needed, where European Union can provide this added value. And I think the best proof of this is the fact that there are still enormous differences in terms of access to quality healthcare, standards of healthcare across the EU, which also directly reflects in health outcomes. So it is a 30 to 40% bigger chance of dying from cancer in Eastern Europe than in some countries of Western Europe. So this is something that we need to change, and the European Union definitely has a role to play here. When we speak of cancer generally, the big change, the paradigm shift which has happened is obviously the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. This was the result, let's say, of the political development which started during the electoral campaign in 2019, where my political group, the EPP, put the cancer as its top political priority in the next mandate. Of course, some things have changed for various reasons. Of course, now COVID-19 has become the major priority of the European Union, but still beating cancer remains to be very, very important. And this is shown by not just by the adoption of Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, but also by the establishment of the BECA committee, Special Committee on Beating Cancer within the Parliament, which should come up with its plan, the draft with its report by the end of this year. So by the end of next week, we should have the vote on the draft report of the BECA committee on the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, which will then go to the plenary and I believe be adopted there with an overwhelming majority. So definitely we are now in a very interesting time related to the fight against cancer, and of course the lung cancer has a big role to play here. So, and I also mentioned some of the concrete developments that are going on within the BECA committee now, just before the vote, which should take place in around 1 week time. So when we speak of the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, the main added value of this plan is that it covers all the stages of fighting cancer. So not just treatment, which is the commonly in the limelight, but also prevention, early diagnosis, and afterlife of cancer survivors. So this is something that why the plan is very important, and I'll try to mention the most important issues within each of these areas. So when we speak of prevention, of course, the main area of action here is to get into the causes of cancer, main causes of cancers, and try to improve the situation with them and try to tackle these causes of cancer. And of course, when we speak of the causes of cancer and causes of mortality of cancer, the main cause is tobacco. And of course, for lung cancer, this is even more important. This is really directly connected with this type of cancer. And this is one area where European Union actually has really concrete legislative instrument at its disposal to act. So we have the rules on the introduction of tobacco products in the market. We have the rules on tobacco marketing, and we also have the rules on tobacco taxation. So when I speak of taxation, I mean indirect taxation, excise duties, which are important because they directly reflect on the price of tobacco, and therefore acts as a disincentive for people to actually buy tobacco, buy cigarettes. And here the Parliament definitely supports the European Commission in terms of that taxation of tobacco, especially of cigarettes, should be much more strengthened to act as a disincentive for people to start smoking. Of course, there is a lot of discussion. I won't go into that about e-cigarettes, vaping, and other types of harm reduction instruments. But this is something where there is a lot of discussion within the BECA committee, and we'll see how the final result, the final report is balanced in that sense in the end. But I can tell you definitely that the stance towards tobacco, especially towards cigarettes, in terms of taxation, in terms of marketing of products, will definitely be strengthened when compared to the current situation. And the similar situation is also with alcohol, not on the same level as with tobacco, but also important. But I think that tobacco for lung cancer is probably the most important. The second point after prevention that I would like to mention is early diagnosis and early detection. And here I'm proud that I was the MEP who lodged an amendment calling for the positive effects of targeted lung screening to be recognized, targeted screening for lung cancer, and also to encourage the Council to include lung and prostate cancer screening in the update of the Council recommendations for 2022. So I'm glad that I was the one who initiated this amendment in the BECA committee, and also I'm glad that these amendments currently found their way also into the compromise amendments. So the compromise amendments are, for those who maybe who do not know a lot about the legislative process within the Parliament. Compromise amendments are so when all of the political groups and MEPs lodge their amendments, then they all come together and try to define these compromise amendments that everybody will support. And I'm glad that this part about targeting lung cancer screening and including lung cancer screening in the update of Council recommendations has found its way into the compromise amendments, which means that we count on the support of the majority of political groups, and I believe that this is something that will be included in the final version of the report. I think this can provide a real game changer when we speak of EU action related to lung cancer, and especially in early detection of lung cancer, which can be one of the main causes of reducing the mortality of lung cancer. So I think this is something which is very, very, very important, and I'm glad that things are moving in the right direction within the committee, but of course we have to wait for the final vote next week. The next part is about treatment. So treatment definitely is something which is very problematic in terms of equality of access and standard of healthcare. So I'm glad that my political group and myself have lodged amendments specifically aiming to reducing these inequalities, these differences between different member states. Specifically in the amendments we mentioned the importance of cohesion policy for investments into health infrastructure and workforce. This is very important because there are big differences in terms of top quality health infrastructure and equipment across member states, but also in terms of workforce, because we know that we had a big brain drain of medical professionals, especially from Eastern Europe to Western Europe. This is something which needs to be tackled, and we have to use European Union resources, especially the European Social Fund and European Regional Development Fund, to create quality working conditions for medical doctors, nurses, etc., so that they stay and remain in their countries to provide cancer healthcare there. And the cohesion policy there is very, very important because we often talk about EU for Health program, which is also important because it is 12 times bigger. This new budgetary health program in the EU budget is 12 times bigger than in the previous 7-year budget. So now it's 5.3 billion. In the previous 7-year budget, it was 450 million euros. But cohesion policy is a much bigger source of investment into healthcare. So in the previous 7-year budgetary period, more than 25 billion euros were invested from cohesion policy funds into health infrastructure and workforce. So these are the funds whose aim is to reduce differences between different member states. So what we are fighting for now is to have these resources much better organized, much better streamlined for different healthcare priorities, including lung cancer, and also to have health outcomes which we can use as benchmarks to evaluate what member states have done when spending these funds. And I'm also glad that I'm in the Committee on Regional Development, which deals with European Union funds in the Parliament, where I'm a rapporteur on this specific topic on how to use cohesion policy funds to reduce health inequalities within the EU. So this is one topic related to health treatment. The other important thing is to make possible for patients to access cross-border healthcare. Because we know that in many member states, there are no adequate healthcare treatments for certain specific diseases, including cancer. And the only way for them is to get healthcare abroad. But to get healthcare abroad, to get healthcare in other member states paid for by their own health insurance, they have to go through a very, very complicated procedure. They're usually not very well informed about their choices, about their rights that are given to them by EU law. So and in many cases, they have to pay upfront for the treatment and then ask for reimbursement afterwards. So we want to change this. So we want to make it easier for the patients to access healthcare abroad, that they do not have to pay upfront for the healthcare treatment, and we want to provide the information to them so that they know what possibilities exist to access best possible healthcare in the EU. And the last point about afterlife of cancer survivors. So this is also very important because we realize that in many cases for cancer survivors face discrimination after 5 or 10 years after surviving cancer, especially, for instance, when they want to take on insurance, especially life insurance, they have to pay much higher premiums than people who have not survived cancer. So what we are proposing is to change the relevant EU legislation and to propose this kind of using the health data when defining premiums, so to have let's say after 5 or 10 years to include the so-called right to be forgotten, which means that usually after 10 years or 5 years for cancer survivors, this data, the fact that they survived cancer, cannot be used against them in a sense they have to pay higher insurance premiums than other people who have not survived cancer. And I think this is also very important for all people who survived cancer, including lung cancer, that they do not have to face discrimination and problems in their everyday life after a certain period of time. And this is something where we also have concrete legislation of the EU, which we just have to change in 1 or 2 articles to introduce this right to be forgotten into the EU legislation. So to sum up, I think European Union has really made a big breakthrough, a big step forward in terms of fighting cancer. The Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, which is not perfect, it could have gone further than it has, but is here. But of course, there is the European Parliament with the Becker report, which should be finalized very soon, which will, I believe, force the Commission and force the other European institutions to go one step further and to have much more stringent rules and stringent instruments to increase the prevention, early detection, treatment, and to improve the life of cancer survivors in the European Union. And I'm especially glad that my amendment on the importance of targeted lung cancer screening has been included in the compromise amendments, and I hope that it will also become part of the final report, because I believe that this kind of provision putting the lung cancer in the limelight, in the focus of future actions on the European level, which also includes funding from EU level for these kinds of actions, will definitely have a big impact in terms of fighting lung cancer. So again, thank you very much for inviting me. I will be very glad to hear also your report and the recommendations and suggestions on what else we as politicians, as policymakers, can do in terms of fighting lung cancer. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, MEP Sokol, and thank you for all that you're doing for the lung cancer community. We really appreciate it. And like you, we look forward to seeing the finalized Becker reports, and we also are keeping everything crossed to see lung cancer screening on any updated EU Council recommendations on cancer screening. And I think all of us here would also echo your thoughts on having cohesive policies across Europe, because we want to ensure equity of access to different types of treatment and care for anyone impacted by lung cancer, and of course anyone impacted by other cancer types as well. So thank you so much for your support of our event today, and thank you so much for hosting us. With that, we'll continue on with today's agenda. So it's back to me now to present a little bit on our 6th report, which is experiences and quality of life of people impacted by lung cancer. So this report will be available on our website, and as part of our sort of toolkit for our report this year, we'll also have those executive summaries, infographics, and so on. And this year, we're also going to have a short video as well on kind of highlighting some of the main results from the report. Alfonso, if you could go the next slide, please. So what were the objectives and the methodology that we used this year? Well, really our objectives with this report were to explore the experiences of people impacted by this disease throughout the disease journey, because we know that things can change very rapidly for some people, and then for others it can change more slowly, and there can be a number of different ups and downs and over and back and all sorts of things that can happen during the disease journey. We also wanted to provide a space for people to share their opinions and insights of what they have experienced, and of course to also explore quality of life of those impacted by lung cancer. So how we went about that is pretty much the methodology that we've used for all of our other reports, which included an extensive literature review, which then of course helped to feed into the questions that formed our qualitative interviews and our online survey. So we had 800 people who responded to our survey, so 800 participants. This was broken into 515 people living with lung cancer and 285 people in caregiving capacity. And we had responses from 21 European countries. And in terms of our qualitative interviews, this was split between people with lung cancer and again those in a caregiving capacity. And this was 16 people in total from a number of EU countries as well. Next slide, please, Alfonso. So I'm just going to give a sort of a whistle-stop tour of our report, because there's a lot of information and data in there. So please do go check it out. But I just wanted to start by giving a little bit of an overview of the participant characteristics. And in my first slide, these characteristics are people living with lung cancer that participated in the survey. So the majority were women and were between 55 and 64 years of age. The majority were also diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer, particularly adenocarcinoma. Nearly 70% of all those that participated confirmed that their tumour was positive for one molecular marker, and about 60% had stage 4 disease. And at the time of completing our survey, the majority of participants were on some form of active treatment. Next slide, please. So when we look at those that were in a caregiving capacity, again, most of these were women. They were a little bit younger in the 35 to 40 years of age, but there was more of a split in an range of years of age. The majority were the primary caregiver. However, we did have a portion of participants stating that they were the only caregiver for their loved ones. Around half of the caregivers stated that their loved ones had stage 4 disease. And again, like those living with lung cancer, a lot of these were people who were in active treatment as well. Next slide, please, Alfonso. So in terms of the spheres that we tried to look at, we did actually look at quite a number of these spheres. So they were around daily life and functioning, living with side effects and symptoms, healthcare and involvement in treatment decision processes, because we do hear a lot about shared decision making, but we don't know if that's reality for most people. Of course, most importantly, we also looked at quality of life and well-being. And also as part of this survey, we looked at end-of-life decisions and care as well. Next slide. So this is a very sort of brief overview of the main findings in terms of daily life. So the majority of our participants did experience some form of limitation in their daily life. And most of these limitations were experienced for reasons relating to fatigue, breathlessness, and emotional issues as well. And when we looked a little bit more as to what those daily life impacts were, a lot of it revolved around just the ability to shop, to climb stairs, to walk for about 15 minutes. But nearly half of all our participants needed some form of assistance to perform at least one daily activity. So here already, just in this very brief infographic, you can see that there is a huge impact on daily life. Next slide, please. And here is a little bit of a more in-depth view when we look about quality of life. So you can see the main ones that came up were around fatigue, and fatigue is something that has come up quite a lot in a number of the surveys that we've undertaken. But fatigue can be something that is sometimes overlooked as well. So we need to do more here on recognizing fatigue and trying to deal with fatigue and in a way that's more helpful for people that are experiencing it. Sleeping problems were also quite a large issue, and this was really around, worrying, different worries that people would have, nocturia and pain. There were also a number of cognitive difficulties reported in terms of, trying to remember things or concentrating on things that were happening. Something that's not really spoken about a lot within the community is the impact on sexual relationships and sexual function. And we did find in our survey that about 25% of participants did feel that there was an impact on this part of their relationship. And again, a lot of this was down to fatigue, emotional issues, and body changes as well. Over half, or nearly half of our participants did have an issue with eating. So that may have been due to side effects or treatment, such as dry mouth, changes in taste or smell, and appetite loss as well. And then about 55% of all our participants had a reduction in physical activity. And again, here you're seeing fatigue playing a huge role, breathlessness and pain as well. Next slide, please, Alfonso. In terms of healthcare, when we looked into this in a little bit more detail, Over half of our participants felt ill-equipped to self-manage their side effects, and they didn't feel that they had a lot of sort of information or support in which to do this. About a quarter of all of those participated in our survey didn't feel that they participated in their own treatment decisions, which is, I think, is something that we really need to look into more. And about 40% felt that they didn't receive all of the medical information they felt that they would have needed. And when we looked at end-of-life care, about 32% of our participants had not discussed end-of-life care with anyone, even though they would really have liked to have done so. So again, something that we need to start addressing within the community. Next slide, please. When we looked at some information and support needs, so there was a number of top priority and other important topics, and really it revolved around how to manage side effects, psychological counselling, how to manage around nutrition and exercise, and also medical information. So none of these are surprising given the data that we found in the other questions in this survey. Other important topics were around social resources and rights, and around, patient organisations, peer-to-peer support, and also about a fifth of all our participants felt that they needed some help in navigating the healthcare system. Next slide, please. And here is just sort of a little bit of a flavour of some of the quotes that came back from some of the qualitative interviews. So for some people, like if you take one here in blue, I didn't dare to ask the doctors for a lot of information about support, so I felt supported mainly by patients' associations and my family. Some others have said that they felt that it was difficult to meet up with friends because they were going out and the person just wanted to go to bed because of the fatigue. And a lot of sort of the quotes and feedback we got back was really about people trying to learn to deal with the limitations that they were now facing, and trying to adapt their routines so that they could sort of better deal with the things that they were facing in their day-to-day life. Next slide, please, Alfonso. So now when we look at the data that we obtained from those in a caregiving capacity, the spheres we looked at were pretty much the same, just a little bit of difference. It was looking at daily life and caregiving, the experience of caregiving. Again, here we looked at healthcare and involvement in treatment decision processes, quality of life and well-being. And within here, we also asked about end-of-life decisions in care as well. Next slide, please. So again, here's a very brief overview on sort of the impact around daily life. So about 88% of all those that participated in a caregiving capacity experienced some form of limitation. And the main reasons around this were emotional concerns, the requirements of the various treatments, and the caregiving responsibilities that they felt they had. A lot of our participants experienced some form of stress while providing care. About 80% spent a lot of time thinking about the disease, and they also felt that their life was now dominated by the disease. And really some of the main factors contributing to the stresses they felt were dealing with declining health of their loved one, and also trying their best to provide the emotional support that their loved one needed. Next slide, please. And here again is just a very simple infographic, just with some of the main points that were identified when we looked at sort of balancing the caregiving role with their own care. So coming out of this, some people experienced physical issues since starting caregiving, and this was really mainly around disturbances to their sleep and experiencing fatigue. About half of our participants, they felt there was a reduction in their physical activity. Again, a lot of this came back to how they were feeling emotionally and fatigue. So fatigue really is something that's coming out for both people with this disease and those in a caregiving capacity. What was very worrying was about 50% of our our participants stated that they did not self-care at all or just a little bit. And a lot of people acknowledge that they have not attended all of their own medical appointments, which of course is very worrying. About 46% reported that they felt that they did not have time for themselves, and about 31% felt that they'd lost a certain aspect of their personal privacy as well. Caregivers also experienced impact on their nutrition. So this was, due to changing in eating patterns, really related to stress, and nutrition became a secondary concern for about 60% of those that participated in our survey. Next slide, please. When we looked at healthcare from the caregiver's point of view, about nearly 70% did not feel supported in their role in providing care to their loved one. Here we did find that a greater number were involved in treatment decisions. So about 8 out of 10 were involved in treatment decision making. So this shows you the importance of having information out there that might be more caregiver specific. Nearly 60% did not receive any support to try and improve their own health or quality of life. And nearly 45% guarded medical information to protect their loved one. Next slide, please. And in terms of caregiving experiences, we can see some of those here in this little infographic as well. And a lot of it was around trying to sort of balancing caregiving with other responsibilities in terms of helping to make decisions for their loved one, balancing caregiving with own care, managing medical needs, finding support services, a whole host of different things that really impacted caregiving experiences. Next slide, please. When we looked at information and support needs for caregivers, there was some overlap here between caregivers and those living with lung cancer. So a top priority again was around psychological counselling, how to deal with and manage side effects, and medical information again was something of an unmet need. Other important topics overlapped again, people living with lung cancer in terms of trying to help navigate the healthcare system, having social resources and knowing about their rights, and patient organisations and peer support came up here as well. And then about a quarter felt that it would be very important to have information on nutrition and exercise as well. Next slide, please. So that is really a whistle-stop tour of our 6th report. When you log in online and you download the report, you will see that there's a huge amount of information and data within our report, and a lot more than what I was able to put into here to a short talk. So please do go check out the report, have a read. There's a lot of very interesting information there, and I think there's a lot of things there that we can work on within the lung cancer community as well. So it's now my very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who's Lavinia McGee. Lavinia is a board member of Lucha. She is also a member of Lung Cancer Nursing UK and is a thoracic oncology nurse consultant in Royal Papworth Hospital in the UK. And Lavinia is going to give us more of a clinical perspective of quality of life for people living with lung cancer. Over to you, Lavinia.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for that introduction, and also thanks to the patients and the caregivers that have given so freely of their data for this report. I'm very lucky that I do work with a fantastic team at Royal Papworth Hospital, but in particular a clinical nurse specialist team, which is just amazing to be part of. And prior to that, about 20 to 30 years ago, I was actually a research nurse in clinical trials and involved very much in the trials looking at TKIs coming on board, and as part of that, measuring quality of life. So if we could have the next slide, please, Alfonso. So I thought I'd just look at a definition of quality of life. It does look a bit wordy, but this really highlights the complexity of the topic. So quality of life is an individual's perception of their position in life in the context of the culture and value systems in which they live and in relation to their goals, expectations, standards, and concerns. It's a broad-ranging concept affected in a complex way by the person's physical health, psychological state, level of independence, social relationships, personal beliefs, and their relationship to salient features of their environment. And I think we've really heard that echoed beautifully by Anne-Marie in her summary of the report. But also important to look at is health-related quality of life, which is an assessment of how the individual's well-being may be affected over time by the disease, disability, or disorders. This is very much looking at quality of life, not just related to cancer, but to everything that impacts on a patient. Next slide, please, Alfonso. So how do we measure quality of life? There are multiple formats in which we can do this, qualitative and quantitative. When involved in clinical trials, we very much use common toxicity criteria to look at adverse events, which could be pain, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, which was mentioned, mucositis, anything at all, and it sort of gets measured by a number. Because there's the need for that sort of concrete measurable data, but also qualitative information and data is so important that we get from patients. This can, of course, vary over time and react to external influences. So whether it's diagnosis, pre-treatment, during treatment, post-treatment, the quality of life can, of course, vary. And there are multiple perspectives of the same objective situation, and these can differ. And I recall very clearly doing a quality of life assessment when I was quite new in the job, and a patient had very severe nausea, but interestingly, no vomiting. And I just made the comment, oh, isn't that great? You know, you didn't vomit. And then afterwards thought, how dare I say something like that to a patient when clearly even grade 1 nausea is quite unpleasant, let alone 2, 3. So really the patient's perspective of what they're experiencing is so important. And we've seen over the years the clinical trial outcomes. Clearly, when it's a treatment-related trial, we do want to know the progression-free survival and overall survival, but primary endpoints are now very much relating to quality of life, because that is what is so important and impacts so much on the lives of our patients and caregivers. Next slide, please, Alfonso.
Yeah, Lavinia, may I ask you to enable your webcam, please, so people can see you? And move to the next
Can you
slide.
see me now?
Let's see. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so the fourth slide, please, Alfonso.
I think this was this one is yeah. Can you see the slide, Lavinia?
Yeah, I'll do that. I was going to show you some examples of the questionnaires, but you can see from this slide the questionnaires, they are actually multidimensional, and we've alluded to this already, going through sort of the physical, social, emotional, cognitive, work or role related, spiritual, disease related symptoms, therapy induced side effects, and financial. All of these have a huge impact. And questionnaires can be generic, covering many of these, or actually very specific. So you can have, for example, the HADS questionnaire, which looks at hospital anxiety and depression scale. So there are many questionnaires out there which will relate to specific dimensions that are mentioned here. Next slide, please. And here we have a fairly common, many of you have seen this, sort of a 10-point analog scale that you can use for many things. This example shows pain, and you can score it from 0 to 10. and or break it down to being when 0 is no pain, going to mild, moderate, severe, very severe, up to the worst possible, or use a visual representation or even groups. So this gives patients just various options in order to score whatever the symptom is that is being measured. Next slide, please. This is the European Organisation of Research and Treatment of Cancer, EORTC, Quality of Life Questionnaire C30. This is an example of a generic questionnaire, and there's 30 questions in total, looking at functional, symptom, single items, and global quality of life. So you can see there how this is actually split up into the different areas. Next slide, please. So I did have a site-specific questionnaire. Anyway, so tumors, all tumors then have a site-specific add-on to the EORTC generic quality of life. And for lung cancer, it very much then looks at breathing, cough, difficulty with chest pain. And these questionnaires look at how you've been feeling in the past week. And I know that patients often find that quite difficult because even in a day, let alone a week, your symptoms can fluctuate. So it's just very much feeling in general how you felt over the past week as to how you score between 1 and 4, whether your response would be not at all, a little, or quite a bit, or very much. And patients obviously deal with their daily life and functioning, and then living with the side effects and symptoms of their treatment. And they've got healthcare involvement in the treatment decision process and looking at their quality of life and well-being. And as Anne-Marie said earlier, the end of life decisions and care. Next slide, please. This was the example area of the generic EORTC QLQC30. So there you can see the questions being asked and the responses, and in particular from question 6 onwards, asking you to specifically think of the past week. Next slide, please. And that's the lung cancer 13, so questions specific to lung cancer. Next slide, please. Just to say, we are Luce, so we want to think that everything will be available no matter which country we come from. So this particular example has a fantastic array of translations available, and I hope you can see your country there. Next slide, please. Another measurement that we use a lot in the clinical setting is performance status. This is the World Health Organization performance status I've got here. There's also another known as the Karnofsky. And as soon as you present, people will be thinking about your performance status clinically. So grade 0 means you're fully active, no problems at all. You can do everything without restriction. 1 is you're slightly restricted in physical activity, but you're up and about, basically doing whatever you need to. But perhaps with just maybe 1 or 2 symptoms. 2 shows that you are up and about, able to carry out your self-care, but you may have to spend a part of the day, sitting, but definitely less than 50%. Performance status 3, you're capable only of limited self-care. You need some help with your activities of daily living, and you're actually confined to a bed or chair for more than half of the normal waking hours. Performance status 4, disabled, can't carry out your self-care and confined to bed or chair. And what we can do as clinical nurse specialists is when we know what your performance status is perhaps look at why are you that performance status? And is there anything that we can do to improve your performance status? And things like this can be related to perhaps looking at your medication. If you've got a comorbidity like COPD, are your inhalers optimized? Is there anything we can do to make your breathing better? If you've been losing weight, can we help with your diet, your nutrition? If you've been feeling fatigued, is there anything we can help with that? So very often, or sometimes, if someone presents with performance status 2, with a little bit of workup and help and input, it can actually change that to performance status 1. And this may be the difference to receiving treatment or not. But very often, a perception of performance status can be different, even with your own family. So what you think your performance status is may not be what your loved one considers it to be. So it's just trying to get that fine line and looking at how to really optimize your capability prior to starting treatment and during treatment. Next slide, please. Another measurement that we use a lot is holistic needs assessment, with the key thing really here being holistic. This was designed by Macmillan in the UK, and the website's there. But this very much helps clinical nurse specialists to think in total about a patient's needs and identify their concerns up front, and to be able to start a conversation about what is important to you and your family. And in conjunction with the patient, then develop a personalized care plan and support plan, which is fantastic then to look at and go back to and really signpost patients to services. Because one of the key things is to share the right information at the right times and not to overload patients with information that they really don't need. So to be really specific about what is required, almost like an information prescription rather than globally giving a lot of information and overloading patients and their families. And it's ideal to carry out something like a holistic needs assessment on meeting a patient. So before diagnosis, then prior to treatment, when treatment is completed, and also then at any point of recurrence. But I do like to think that when we are talking to our patients at any point, any telephone conversation today, that I will have the holistic needs assessment in my head and really act as a patient's key worker. Next slide, please. So I just liked this quote, thinking of quality of life and how we measure it, because it is often much worse to have a good measurement of the wrong thing, especially when, as often the case, the wrong thing will in fact be used as an indicator of the right thing, than to have a poor measurement of the right thing. So I think it's important that we are measuring the right thing and what you say is true for you. Next slide, please. Now, I love this slide, and I have stolen it from Jill Feldman with her support. Many of you may know Jill, one of our colleagues and patient advocate from America. But if someone like Jill walked into clinic, I mean, I would just be saying, she looks great. And I would be that blue arrow. What can we do? How can my care team help here? But in actual fact, despite that massive grin and looking amazing, everything there in red is how Jill actually feels. So we're just not thinking of all these things that are so very real for you, and the impact that a lung cancer diagnosis and ongoing treatment has. I mean, I'll let you just look at that slide for a few more seconds, because it is just very real as to what is happening. And I love the way that the symptoms that Jill's describing there are appropriate to the point in her body. So it really gives a lot of food for thought, that slide. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that, and we may hear more about it from our speakers to come. Next slide. And that's me finished. Thank you, Alfonso.
Lavinia, thank you so much for that overview. And I think, as you say, Jill Feldman's slide there really does sum it up, because I think sometimes we just see how a person looks and we just make a lot of automatic assumptions. And as you say, it's very, very important to look past that. And it's very interesting to also hear about the holistic needs assessment as well, because you can see just how important that is for people impacted by lung cancer. And I have to say, I really liked your 2 keys quote. I mean, it's so true, isn't it? And this is why we have to make crucial and make very, very certain that the things we are doing are the best things that we can be doing. and things that are really going to have an impact on people that are living with this condition on a day-to-day. So thank you
Absolutely, it's
so
doing the right
much.
thing at the right time.
Exactly. So
Thank
thank you so much for that overview, Lavinia. That was fantastic. So we're now going to move on to the next part of our agenda, and this is more personal experiences of lung cancer. And we're so very grateful to both Sally Hall and Georges Sayavas. I'm so sorry, Georges. I have completely messed up the pronunciation of your surname there, so please accept my apologies. And they have pre-recorded 2 videos to give us a little bit of a flavour of their personal experiences. So Sally Hall is a lung cancer survivor, and Georges was a lung cancer caregiver. So Alfonso, if you could play both those videos for us now, please, that would be great.
Hello, I'm Sally Hall. Nearly 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with non-squamous cell lung cancer, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about how it's affected my life. I've never ever smoked, and I've never had a cough, so this diagnosis came as a bit of a shock. I'd had a bit of back pain following a weekend clearing out a garage, several trips to the tip, and lots of heavy lifting. So back pain just, came with the task, as it were. It did settle. I had a bit of physio, but it did come back a month or so later with a bit of sciatica. So I did go for a scan, but nobody, myself, GP, physio, anybody expected the scan results come back showing 2 spinal mets and a probable lung cancer. So from 1 minute, I'd gone from being independent working girl to big time patient with a very uncertain future. I still can't get over how life can just change in that split second. Anyway, moving on, I very quickly had a bronchoscopy, and very shortly after that underwent big spinal surgery for spinal decompression and stabilisation, and that was followed in a few weeks by spinal radiotherapy. But somewhere in there was some good news, and I was found to be EGFR positive, exon 19, and that meant I could take tablets rather than have to have chemo. It was good news at the time, but those pesky little tablets do give you side effects, and most of them are pretty unpleasant, and they last for the duration of the treatment. They were worse in the first few months, but I had been fortunately prepared to know how to manage them, have some Imodium in, lots of stuff to slap on your skin. And over the time, I have learnt to sort of juggle the side effects with a bit of medication, but I've tried to steer of taking clear of more drugs just to counteract side effects of drugs. But I'm still occasionally caught out, and quite frankly, I hate my hair. But let's move on. The primary tumour did shrink really quickly, and I was offered a lobectomy. Now, I think that was pretty controversial thinking in lung circles at the time, but my team were up for it. They explained it all to me, and the operation went ahead. Psychologically, marvellous to know that the primary can't come back, though I am very well aware that the cancer could rear its ugly head anywhere at any time. But I'm truly grateful that my team not followed, but they treated me as a patient rather than just following rigid guidance. But let's face it, guidance is guidance, and there's always room for a bit of manoeuvre. So since the end of 2014, my CT scans have been pretty stable, no evidence of new disease. I keep taking the tablets. We had a bit of a hiccup when they tried to change me to a generic version, which just brought all the side effects back with a vengeance. But we finally convinced pharmacy that perhaps we could go back to the old version, and life has returned to whatever the new normal was. let's face it, the first year or so actually just passed in a daze, from the operation to radiotherapy to tablets to more operation. I got through that with the help of obviously all the clinical teams, doctors, nurses, HCAs, phlebotomists, cleaners, absolutely everybody was wonderful. And at home, friends and neighbours couldn't do enough. There's no way I could have managed without them. At the time, there wasn't actually a local lung cancer support group going near our hospital, which, considering it's one of the biggest, well, the biggest cancer hospital in Europe, was a bit of a surprise. But I'm not sure I was ready for support at the time. I was too busy sort of still trying to get my head around what had happened and learn to get fully mobile again. And on top of that, of course, you have to deal with the helpful comments like, I didn't know you smoked, or you must have smoked. So the stigma around lung cancer needs sorting, but that's not for today. So at that time, I was in a sort of routine of 4 weekly hospital appointments, and life really did revolve around the hospital. Since then, things have improved. I had to get to grips with the fact that my old life was gone and just mourn it in some ways. You know, I wasn't going to be going up all the Munros that I hadn't yet climbed. I wasn't going to be improving my golf handicap. But somewhere along the line, I had to find something else that came in there. Our local Maggie's Centre came into being 2 years into my cancer journey, and really with their support I've regained a lot of confidence and found some of the old me. Work had gone by the wayside, but you know, I never went back after my scan. But over time, with the support from Maggie's and everybody else, I managed to get some confidence back, doing some work with treatment summaries for Macmillan, and that moved on to me sitting on Greater Lung, our local lung cancer pathway board, and that gave me a purpose to start thinking about getting to grips with life properly again. My family are in different countries. I'm reliant on friends and neighbours for support locally, and cancer's changed some of those relationships. Some for the good, some for the worst, but cancer's also brought in new friends and relationships. Financially, I'm very lucky to have an occupational pension. I know other people aren't in that situation, but let's face it, cancer's expensive. Things need looking at all sort of areas. I did have to give up my pride and ask for a lot more help than I thought. I'm better at it now, but it's still not easy. When I first started travelling again, and asking for assistance on planes and trains was actually embarrassing, but I wouldn't have travelled if I hadn't been able to have assistance. And anything new, anything different, it's always hard the first time, but once I'd done it, I was away. I was here, there and everywhere when travel insurance allowed. We'll be back to that in a minute. I miss spontaneity in life. I just miss being able to just drop things and go without having to plan around possible side effects or what you need to take with you. I've also learned to refuse invitations and not take on too much. I need space in my diary to fight off fatigue. I do miss particularly being able to just hop on the plane and miss travelling abroad, though travel insurance and getting travel insurance was such a stress that sometimes you wonder why you bother. I did usually manage to get it at a cost, and I will be having a go once all this COVID nonsense dies down, because I am just desperate to get back to Greece. I now fit, or I hope I fit, cancer into my life rather than my life revolving around cancer, if you understand the difference. I'm still at the hospital every 8 weeks. I have 4 monthly scans. They aren't routine. Scan anxiety gets to you every single time, because the next scan could be the one where things change. Managing side effects has become part of my life. Knowing that where every loo is in Greater Manchester is an asset, and I'm considering somebody needs to really write a guide. Fatigue and anxieties do slip through the net from time to time, but I've learned not to beat myself up about it. Life's very, very different to the one I thought I'd be living in my 60s, but by learning to adapt accept help, look for different challenges. It is possible to live a fulfilling life with cancer. My current energies, work energies, are being channeled into promoting lung cancer awareness across the board, particularly diagnosis at early stage, and particularly lung cancer in never smokers. I might not be able to get up mountains anymore, and I might not be able to do many of the things I used to, but I can do a few miles on the gentle hills around here, and I'm just off to do that before it goes too dark. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Giorgos Heravas and I am from Greece. I'm a well-qualified IT specialist with considerable experience in the field of healthcare systems. I would like to thank Lucha and Fairlife, a Greek organization, for the opportunity to share my personal story. I hope my story will help other people and will assist to change procedures. I do remain at anyone's disposal to help and share any information. I'm the major caregiver to my close relative. He has non-small cell lung cancer, EGFR, exon 20 insertion mutation. My relative profile, non-smoker, basically never smoker, non-alcohol, calm and without stress attitude, athletic, classic Mediterranean food without bad habits. He had an extensive yearly full checkup. That used to be every June. His last checkup was in June 2018. The test results were excellent. 2 months later, with pulmonary embolism symptoms, went to hospital. His diagnosis was non-small cell lung cancer, EGFR positive, exon 20 insertion mutation. Stage 4, primary tumor, lung in the cancer, secondary tumor, metastatic tumors, hundreds of them in the lungs, liver, lymph nodes, bones and brain. It is a rare and aggressive cancer type with poor survival and treatment. That was a shock to me. In that period, I was working outside the European Union country. I did realize that the situation is life-threatening and very difficult. I quit my job. I knew that we are starting up a difficult journey and a fight to survive. The time was against us. I had 3 scopes. 1, stabilization and control the disease. 2, fight the disease. 3, transform the disease in a chronic disease. I did turn the world upside down. We did travel under our own cost, risk and responsibility abroad. At that point, I need to say thanks to all good friends that they did support us by any means. Special thanks to Doron, Ilana and Mahdi. The financial support of Mahdi saved his life. I did, and I still contacting with several hospital doctors and universities worldwide, with Japan, Kyoto University, with USA, MD Anderson, MIT Boston University, with Israel, Suraski Medical Center, several European universities and hospitals. There are a lot of excellent and state-of-the-art European institutes, but the procedure to get access with them was needed time. There was no time to waste for us. On the other hand, institutes and hospitals outside Europe reacted too fast. We had run out of options. He did participate in a clinical study. He did receive several treatments and still does. 86 immunotherapies until today, 57 chemotherapies, 10 brain stereostatics radiosurgery seasons, 2,950 medicines from September 2018 until 27 of November 2021. Medicines of several types to support him. Today, he is in a stable condition. He is going to switch to a new treatment schema to avoid disease progression in next coming days. He is enjoying a normal life. He is exercising daily. He has high spirit and he is in a good shape. The financial impact to our family is huge. The impact to my job, the psychological impact, the financial impact to Greek government, social insurance organization is huge as well. It is too difficult for a patient or caregiver to know and handle all needed action. I strongly believe that it is needed 12 actions for this support, for this support and procedures. I did it for him, but these actions should be done by task force organization, not by individual people. Most people cannot handle by themselves. 1, coordination, coordinate all engaged persons. I mean all of them. Each of them have a unique critical role. 2, dedication. 3, timing and speed for everything. 4, coordinate fast all tests and exams. 5, need to know, access to clinical studies and information all over the world. 6, provide and share patients, information fast with physicians. 7, procedures to get access to specialized medicines and clinical trials if needed. 8, cost. Money is always the biggest problem. 9, physicians. Do not start for only one physician knowledge. Ask for second and third opinion. Ask physicians to exchange information. It is good for patient and for them. 10. Share your problem and ask for help. 11. Physicians' time. They have too many responsibilities. Assist them with anything, with paperwork. 12. You are not alone. You might not know, but there are always people ready to assist you. Detecting lung cancer early can save lives. Low-dose CT scan should be a must for the checkup. Europe should organize a task force to coordinate and assist patients to access treatments. A cancer patient does not have time to waste on procedures and paperwork. It has no sense to diagnose a patient with a cancer and then to wait for months to get access to the right treatment. When someone has a problem with his tooth, is not waiting for months to fix it. Why should I wait for months to access the right treatment? Unfortunately, and according to international statistics, cancer is a situation that everyone will have at least one in their lives. I'm usually saying when and where it will happen. We can assist to fight cancer. We can assist other people, and in that way, we assist ourselves. This is my truth. We must join our knowledge and forces to assist additional people. I need to say thanks to all doctors and health care team. Thank you for your time.
Well, very powerful videos from Sally and Georges, and really, really showing us some of the things that people are facing in their day-to-day lives, and what's being said there. Time is not a luxury that people with lung cancer have, and this is why we do need to get better treatment options. We do need to improve earlier diagnosis strategies. We need to get lung cancer screening. We need to have allied healthcare supports in dealing with side effects and symptoms of lung cancer and treatment. We need all of those things, and we need them now, because people cannot be waiting for these things. And as Georges also alluded to, the financial impact of a diagnosis is very, very tough. And I think it's a lot then to try and expect that people have financial resources to pay for things out of their own pocket, whether it's psychological supports, physiotherapy supports, whatever it might be. So we really need to do more within that scope as well. And just really huge thanks to both of you for sharing your personal experiences with this disease. And I mean, so much there that we really need to take on board and we really need to think about. And I think, again, it comes back to one of those slides that Lavinia showed with Jill, that we need to have a better appreciation of what people are going through and trying to figure out what we can do to help people impacted by this disease. So very powerful stories, and thank you both so much for sharing those with us today. We now have time for some questions before the summary and call to action of our meeting. So Lavinia, I do have a quick question for you, if that's okay. So one of the questions that we have is around prehabilitation and rehabilitation. Is that something that is widely available? Because we know that those types of services can really help people in terms of the breathlessness and fatigue. So just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, prehabilitation is a real buzzword, and it was set up and really quite widely available throughout the UK. I can't comment on the rest of Europe, but obviously with COVID restrictions, some services have obviously been impacted by that. But there's clear evidence to show that prehabilitation works wonders for patients, and their outcome has been shown to be much better, and in particular, the quality of life. What we're trying to do is make sure now all our patients regarding surgery come to a pre-admission clinic, and during that make sure that there's time given to patients to make sure that everything is done, so that in order when they come in for their surgery, they are absolutely worked up and optimized and maximized for everything. But regarding radiotherapy, chemotherapy, immunotherapies, and targeted therapies, it has been a challenge for many hospitals. A lot of work is being done virtually now, but if patients and their caregivers are just better informed and know how to optimize their own well-being, then during their treatment and after their treatment, obviously they fare much better. But how we get that spread throughout every country and make sure that your postcode doesn't deter you from receiving that is quite a challenge and resource and a workforce issue, really.
Yeah, so hopefully we can really, try and do some sort of workaround or some way that we can introduce those services better. And it's not sort of that luxury add-on, it's something that's integrated into the care pathway, because we know it can make such a huge difference. There's a question in the chat from Emily. Are you as Lucha planning any concrete projects to support the caregivers in 2022? So thank you for that question, Emily. We are currently developing our action plan and have been developing our action plan for 2022. And within that, we will have some things that are both for people impacted by lung cancer and those in a caregiving capacity. In the last couple of years, we have tried to do more in terms of bringing caregivers more into the space. So, for example, in our last 2 surveys and reports, we've included caregiver-specific surveys as well as surveys for people impacted by lung cancer. And we've also included that within sort of the qualitative interviews and things that we do as well. It is something that is coming more to the fore, not only with Lucha, but with other organizations as well. And we are having a look to see what's happening on a more global scale so that we can try and see what we can incorporate into Lucha. So it is definitely something that we want to touch on within our action plan in 2022. So thank you for that question. One of the other questions we got was around language. So I should have said when I was giving the brief overview on the report, that yes, our surveys were translated into 15 different European languages. Our main report is available in English, but our infographics and our executive summary will be available in a number of different languages. If you're in a country and you would like to do something with this report or our executive summary or whatever it might be, and the language you're looking for is not there, please do get in touch with us and we'll see what we can do to help or assist in getting that into a language that's relevant to your location. So just please do get in touch. But yes, our survey was in 15 different languages. That I think is all of the questions we got in. I'm just going to double check to make sure I can't see any other questions. No, I think that's it. Obviously, we are sort of coming now towards the end of the meeting. So given that there's no other questions that I can see, I'll move on to the summary and call to action. So Alfonso, if you just give the next slide, please. So the summary that I have on the slide here is pretty simplistic given the amount of data that we have generated from this report. But I think it sort of sums it up as well, because it really is highlighting the importance of person-centered pathways for people impacted by lung cancer. And this is from diagnosis to treatment and beyond. So anything really that's a part of any care pathway for people living with lung cancer is something that we need to ensure all of those things are person-centered. And we also need to ensure that some of these things that are sort of termed, I guess, more holistic, or whatever way the sort of medical profession might look at, that these types of things can have a big positive impact on people living with this disease. And it's something that we need to ensure is brought into the care pathways more. And something that we've also been finding is that, there's an awful lot of different peer-to-peer support out there. There's a lot of different patient organizations, but people aren't necessarily signposted to those organizations. So we need to ensure that we're doing more on that ground level as well, because we've heard through the data here and from a lot of other people within the community that peer-to-peer support, being involved with patient organisations can have a huge positive impact as well. So I'll ask Alfonso for the next slide. So our call to action from this report, we've broken it down into 4 key call to actions. And one is to ensure access to supports to help with the impact of lung cancer and treatment. And that really is supports not only for people living with the disease, but also those in a caregiving capacity as well. And I alluded to some of those supports when I was chatting about the summary. You know, it's not just all about treatment support, but it's also about, you know, psychological supports, dealing with the side effects and symptoms of the disease, all of those different things that this encompasses. Another point on our call to action is around developing care plans and educational programs with the aim to improve quality of life for people impacted by lung cancer. So one of the things that did come out of this report was that, you know, people aren't sure of how they can best self-manage side effects and symptoms. So we need to do more around that. And we also found from those in a caregiving capacity that they were unsure, you know, are they providing the best things that they should be providing? Is there another way they should be providing support? So I think if things like that are developed into care plans and educational programs, it's going to help a lot of people within the lung cancer community. Next slide, please, Alfonso. So following on from those other 2 points, oh, no, next slide, please, Alfonso. Oh, no, we're missing 2 of our call to action points there. So our,
yeah, it seems we're missing a couple of them.
We're missing 2. So our other 2 call to action points were around end of life care, making sure that there are supports available for end of life care. And the other call to action has escaped my head now, so do apologies, is around other supports as well. But all of that, of course, is going to be in our report, so you can see everything there. Oh yes, develop better communication between people impacted by lung cancer and healthcare professionals, and raising awareness and developing communication support concerning end-of-life care. So those were the other 2 call to action points, because what we saw from the healthcare decision making is that we do need better communication there, because a number of people felt that they didn't have all of the medical information that they needed. And then on the data that we generated around end-of-life care, there was a lot of people that responded to those questions, felt that there was a need for more open discussion around that as well. So those were our 4 call to action points, and apologies here for the duplication in slide, but all of that can be seen in our full report, in our executive summary, and in our infographics as well. So that was my last slide, my call to action. And as always, these reports are not possible without a huge village, a huge European village. So before we close this meeting, I would just like to say a couple of huge thank yous. One is to Diego Villon from Mass-Case Ideas Foundation. And as you can tell, Diego, my pronunciation skills are not fantastic, so I do apologize. But thank you so much for leading this, and just being such a huge, massive support to Lucha as well. I'd also like to thank the working group that we had this year for the Lucha report, and that was Elena Comgescu, Bernard Gaspar, Meryl Hennig, Leslie Mannett, and Shanae Shiloh, and also to our 2 previous board members whose mandate was up earlier this year. That's Regine and Tommy as well. So thank you both for all of your support on this report as well. So, and of course, thank you to MEP Sokol for hosting us and supporting us today. Huge thanks to Lavinia, to Sally, to Georges, for all of you for joining us today for the launch of our report. And also huge thanks to all of our supporters who help fund us and fund our activities. Without that, we wouldn't be able to do all of the things that we can do. So really, it's a huge European village and community that get us to points like this in Lucha and allow us to do the work that we do. So huge thank you. I do direct you to the website to download the full report. And we also have a QR code here below on the side that you can scan, and that will bring you directly in as well. And to play us out, we are going to have one of the short videos that we've developed this year, which gives sort of the highlight overview of the report data as well. So I'll ask Alfonso to play that, and thank you all so much once again.
Bye-bye.
Welcome to the 6th edition of the Lung Cancer Europe report. The purpose of this report is to explore the impact of lung cancer on well-being and daily life for people living with this disease and those in a caregiving capacity. Ensure access to support to help with the impact of lung cancer and treatment. Develop care plans and educational programs with the aim to improve quality of life for people impacted by lung cancer. Develop better communication between people impacted by lung cancer and healthcare professionals. Raise awareness and develop communication support concerning end-of-life care.